Okay. Tuko live American Swahili News pamoja na Swahili Villa Online TV. Tunaungana na sauti ya Watanzania. Leo ni mwaka wa 6 toka kupigwa risasi kwa Tundu Lissu. Na katika kipindi chetu cha leo tutaicheza ile lecture yake aliyotoa University of South Carolina hapa Columbia, South Carolina. Lakini kabla tujaanza kuicheza hiyo lecture yake ambayo alitoa kwenye darasa la wanafunzi ambao wanasomea diplomasia katika University of South Carolina, Alamo School of Business, Bishop Mpemba atatufungulia Good Morning Africa. Good Morning Africa, Bishop Mpemba, karibu.
Nashukuru sana Dr. Nigula, nashukuru sana na wasikilizaji wako wote ambao wanasikiliza. Hii ni sauti ya Watanzania inayonguruma toka pande 4 za dunia, na tuko hapa tukikumbuka miaka 6 baada ya madhira makubwa ambayo Mheshimiwa Tundu Lissu aliyapata katika nchi ya Tanzania, ambako alipigwa risasi kede, lakini kwa kudura za Mwenyezi Mungu ndugu yetu Mheshimiwa Tundu Lissu leo ni mzima. Na kwa tunakumbuka udhalimu mkubwa uliofanywa na serikali ya Tanzania awamu ile ya 5, ambapo walikaa na kujipanga kuangamiza maisha ya Mheshimiwa Tundu Lissu, ambaye alikuwa anatoa ushauri jinsi gani nchi inabidi ifanye na hasa inapoingia mikataba na mataifa mengine. Lakini ushauri ule ukaonekana kuwa umewakera, na kwa hiyo wakapanga mpango wa kuangamiza. Ni mambo ambayo yamefanyika miaka 6 iliyopita, kile tunakumbuka udhalimu katika nchi yetu. Na tunasema kwamba Tanzania haiwezi kaendelea katika jinsi hiyo. Tanzania imechukua kona ambayo sio kona nzuri. Lazima irejee katika ukanda wake. Nchi ambayo ilikuwa na heshima katika dunia, lakini baada ya tukio hilo nchi yetu ikapoteza heshima kabisa katika dunia. Tunahitaji kiongozi ambaye atarudisha Tanzania kwenye track yake. Lakini wakati tunakumbuka udhalimu huo mkubwa uliofanywa na hiyo serikali ya awamu ya 5, lakini vile vile tunakumbuka uwezo wa Mwenyezi Mungu. Kwa wale ambao unamwamini Mwenyezi Mungu yupo. Risasi 16 zikaingia katika mwili wa mwanadamu, lakini yule mwanadamu yuko hai katika siku ya leo. Lakini pia tunakumbuka ukarimu mkubwa wa ndugu zetu wa Kenya ambao waliweza kuchangisha damu zao kumsaidia ndugu yetu Mheshimiwa Tundu Lissu, na baadaye akarushwa kupeleka Ubelgiji ambako matibabu yake yaliendelea sana. Kwa hiyo tunawashukuru Watanzania wote ambao kwa njia moja au nyingine walinyosha mikono yao kuweza kuchangia mambo kadha wa kadha. Na hapa tunawakumbuka viongozi wa CHADEMA waliopambana kuhakikisha kwamba anaondolewa Tanzania na kupelekwa katika nchi ya Kenya. Kwa hiyo tunakumbuka ushindi mkubwa na tunasikia raha. Leo ni siku ya furaha, kushangilia na kufurahia jinsi ambavyo Mwenyezi Mungu aliweza kufanya na kumwokoa ndugu yetu ambaye leo amekuwa ni taa inayong'aa katika nchi ya Tanzania, ya kwamba kila anapopita jumbe zake zinagusa Watanzania na kuwafungua macho. Na hata unapozungumzia habari ya mkataba wa IGA wa DP World ambao umepewa sehemu ya nchi yetu bure tu kwa masharti yasiyoeleweka. Kwa hiyo tunakumbuka vile vile kwamba kuna jambo la kufanyika katika nchi yetu, na tunawapongeza maaskofu wote wa TEC ambao wametoa waraka ambao umegusa nchi nzima, bila kusahau diaspora, Watanzania wanaoishi nje ya nchi na Watanzania walio ndani ya nchi ambao wanajumuika katika sauti ya Watanzania, chumba cha sauti ya Watanzania kwenye Clubhouse, na kuweza kupaza sauti kila wakati. Huu ni karibu mwezi wa 3 wa 4 wanazungumza kinyume na mkataba huo ambao ni mkataba usiofaa kabisa katika nchi yetu. Hatuwezi tukaendelea kufurahia kuona ndugu zetu wa Masai wanapata mateso ili kama Mwarabu aweze kupata ardhi. Hatuwezi kufurahia badala zetu kuchukuliwa na Mwarabu na Watanzania kuwa katika hali ya shida. Lango la bandari ni sehemu kubwa sana ya uchumi katika nchi yote. Lakini kwa mkataba huu ni aibu kubwa kwamba viongozi wetu wanaweza kufanya jambo kama hili na hawataki kugeuka. Imefika wakati kama vile ambavyo tumeambiwa mara kwa mara na ndugu yetu Dr. Nigula kwamba it's time for the leaders in our country to repent. They need to change their mind. Wabadilishe fikra na nia zao waweze kuwasikiliza Watanzania. Haiwezekani tukaona viongozi katika nchi wanaoshadadia wageni kutoka nchi wapate fursa za kutosha katika nchi yetu na kuwakandamiza Watanzania wenyewe. Haifai. Nashukuru Dokta, naamini kabisa asante kutoka sauti ya Tanzania. Na mimi naongea nikitokea katika jimbo la Texas hapa nchini Marekani.
Asante sana. Huyo alikuwa ni Bishop Mpemba, moja kwa moja kutoka katika jimbo kama alivyojitambulisha mwenyewe, jimbo la Texas hapo. Asante sana. Hii ni American Swahili News pamoja na Swahiliville Online TV, tuko live. Tutacheza hii hotuba, tutacheza hii lecture, sio hotuba, ni lecture ya Profesa Tundu Lissu ambaye alikuwa akiongea na wanafunzi wa International Studies na African Government kutoka hapa katika chuo kikuu cha University of South Carolina Dalamo School of Business. Asanteni sana Sauti ya Watanzania. Sisi tuko upande wa pili huku, tunaendelea na kipindi chetu. Tutamrusha Tundu Lissu. Kama mnataka kumsikiliza, mnaweza mkaenda, tutawaleteni linki msikilize Tundu Lissu akimwaga madini kuhusiana na demokrasia katika bara la Afrika na hususan Tanzania. Asanteni sana Sauti ya Tanzania.
Asante sana. Bishop, nimependa sana, umenyoosha rula Bishop. Nimefurahi sana.
Okay.
The right timing kabla ulikuwa hujaondoka.
Sasa hebu tumsikilize Mheshimiwa Tundu Lissu akiongea hapo Dalamo School of Business.
Just so that I'm able to speak more freely. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm a Tanzanian. I'm Tanzanian, as Rob was saying. Political activist for Tanzania. Been active in Tanzanian politics for many years. I have been part of the democratic struggles in the country since my student days. I have seen inside of police jails and security prisons. The first time I went to prison was Christmas Eve of 2002. So Christmas of 2002, I was in prison, and I had just come back, by the way, from the United States, where I had been for 3 years. So I have gone through quite a few things, shocking being shot 16 times is not fun. But I have survived, and because I'm alive, I keep on fighting, because that is what you do when things are as horribly wrong as they have been a long time in my country, in Tanzania. Now, I want to talk to you about not about my trials and tribulations, which we can spend days talking about. I just want to talk to you about constitutional reform and the fight against corruption. If you will, another way of putting it, why democracy is important in the struggle against corruption. My assumption is, and has always been, that corruption thrives most in countries or regimes where there is no democracy, where the government cannot be held accountable either by parliament or through parliamentary means, or where there is no free press, or where the judiciary, the courts are not independent, or where civil society, you and me, are not organized. In other words, where there is democracy, democracy creates the best opportunities for dealing with corruption, with questions of abuse of office, because I think it's fair to say corruption, in essence, is abuse of office, of public trust, of public office. I do not pretend to know Africa. Africa is a continent of 54 countries. I have not visited more than 80% of them. So I cannot talk about the state of corruption in Africa. I would not be telling the truth. So I will talk about corruption and give you some examples from the one place that I know best, my own country of Tanzania. I suspect whatever I have to say about Tanzania will hold true for many other countries in the continent, because our politics, our systems of governance are not that much different. Our histories are more or less common. So when I speak of Tanzania, you can, with some degree, take it that I'm also speaking of Kenya to some extent, or about Angola, or perhaps about Nigeria, or any other typical African country. Now, how many of you know where Tanzania is, or have ever heard about Tanzania? Your hands. We're not doing bad, yeah? We are fine. Okay. How many of you have ever heard of Mount Kilimanjaro? Anyone read The Snows of Kilimanjaro by Ernest Hemingway? No? Some of the Ernest Hemingway won his Nobel in 1954, not because of the snows of Kilimanjaro, but he had a lot of stories to tell about the then Tanganyika. Tanzania was then called Tanganyika. Some of his best writing came from big game hunting Tanganyika. So Tanzania is the land of Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest peak in Africa. It's the land of Serengeti, perhaps one of the most magnificent nature attractions you find anywhere in this world. Tanzania is a country of about 60 million people today. It is the largest country in East Africa. It has been independent since 1961 from the British colonial rule. The British colonized pretty much everybody, including Americans, you may remember. For a long time, Tanzania has not been, and still is not, a democracy. And that is why we have a situation where a parliamentary leader could be gunned down 16 times inside a heavily guarded government housing compound, as I was on September 7th, 2017. So we are not a democracy. And because we are not a democracy, we're also very corrupt, very corrupt system, a very corrupt state. It is a country where people in government who hold government offices can steal without any consequences. one of our former presidents who died last year, he was president for 10 years between 1995 and 2005, Benjamin Mkapa, wrote memoirs. He published his memoirs just before he died. And in his memoirs, he says somewhere that when he was president, he and his people, the central bank governor, the minister of finance, they connived to steal $100 million from the central bank in order to finance the ruling party's electoral campaigns for 2005. He writes this in his memoirs. And he could only write that in his memoirs, safe in the knowledge that he is completely protected. There will be no consequences. There are no consequences if you are a government official of any consequence. And that's why the former president, will publish a book in which he admits that they're just stealing money left, right, and center. So we're not a democracy. Now, what are the features? What are the constitutional features of an undemocratic state? What is it about Tanzania? If you look at our constitution and our political system, tells you immediately that this is not a democratic state. And what is it about those features, those constitutional features, which permit corruption? An undemocratic state, the first thing that you notice about a typical African post-colonial state, a typical African post-colonial state was a very undemocratic and has been a very undemocratic state. Now, one of its principal features is concentration of powers in the office of the president. Our presidents are what a constitutional scholar from Nigeria has called imperial presidents. They have powers that remind you of absolute monarchies of 17th and 18th century Europe. Their powers are vast and they are unchecked. In the United States, your president does not get to appoint anybody of consequence without going to Senate for confirmation, right? Every presidential appointee is confirmed by Senate. Is that right? I think my constitutional history of the United States tells me that, at least, that presidential appointees must be confirmed by Parliament, by Senate. The president of the United States cannot use any money, cannot use any taxpayer's money without the authority of Congress. Is that right? Yeah. Now, in a typical African state, the president basically appoints, and this is provided for in the Constitution. The president appoints literally everybody. All ministers, here you elect your governors, right? And sometimes you even elect your police chiefs. Is that right? The president appoints all ministers, all governors, and not just governors, county executives, appoints all judges, appoints all heads of government entities like the Electoral Commission or Telecommunication Commission or your Securities and Exchange Commission. They are all appointees of the president. Did I say judges? All judges, all registrars of all courts, all chief executive officers of companies or corporations or other institutions owned by the government. The president appoints the military chiefs, all of them. All right. So the Tanzanian president, and by Tanzanian president, read a typical African president, is a very powerful person indeed. And all of these appointments are without any parliamentary oversight. Any. No parliamentary confirmation like you have here. And because the president appoints everybody of consequence, of any consequence, these appointees of the president are all the president's men and women. They are accountable to the president and the president alone. The president can dissolve parliament. In fact, he appoints a certain number of parliamentarians. In Tanzania, 10 members of parliament. So if one speaks of a view of Congress, here is congressmen and women are elected, right? In Tanzania, a certain number of them are appointed by the president. Now you can imagine if he or she appoints them, who do they serve when they sit in Congress? Do they serve the people? Or do they serve the president? You have a constitution which says that in money matters, Parliament shall not debate any proposal or motion or bill on money matters unless and until that motion or bill or matter is first approved by the president and tendered in parliament by the minister, and the minister is appointed by the president. In other words, in matters of public finance is also controlled by the president. So if he decides that no one is going to read the country's national budget this year, no one will. Because the president, any debate over money matters, money bills must be approved by the president. The president has power to dissolve parliament. Under what circumstances? If parliament, for some reason, disagrees with the piece of legislation sent by the president, then he can dissolve parliament. In other words, you are supposed to pass the laws that the president wants. So I have concentration of powers. Number two, the second feature of these democratic constitutional systems is the impunity. The impunity within which those vast powers are exercised. There's been a lot of debate here about what to do with Donald Trump, right? After all what happened. There's been a lot of debate about prosecuting him in the courts. Is that right? In Tanzania, the president is effectively above the law. He cannot be prosecuted for anything he does or refuses to do or ignores to do while he's in office. And that's why President Mkapa could write in his memoirs that he and his fellow crooks, stole $100 million and get away with it. So the president enjoys the kind of protection against criminal prosecution that reminds you of, like I say, of 17th and 18th century constitutional monarchs or absolute monarchies of Europe. He's beyond control. He cannot be controlled by parliament. He cannot be taken to court. He controls the instruments of violence. He's the commander-in-chief of the armed services. The exercise of his powers is uncontrolled. The president exercises powers in other spheres as well. In Tanzania, our land law starts by declaring that all lands in Tanzania are public lands at the control and disposition of the president. If you look at our mining law says all minerals in Tanzania are public property at the control and disposition of the president. If you look at our oil and gas law, it says all gas and oil resources of the United Republic are held in trust by the president on behalf of the people of Tanzania. So, this fellow who appoints everyone of consequence, who cannot be held accountable, also controls our resources. You get a point? Do you know what holding property in trust means? A trustee in law. I forgot to tell you I'm a lawyer, so forgive me. If your property is held in trust, is held on your behalf, the person who holds that property in trust on your behalf legally is the owner of the property. He can or she can sell the property or do whatever he wants to do with it, provided, the law says, provided he does it on your behalf or for your interest. So the president, by being a trustee of all the natural resources and the land and the animals and the forests and everything in Tanzania, is effectively the owner of those resources. And so that is the constitutional and political system that has obtained in Tanzania since 1962. We got independence in 1961. We were a parliamentary democracy. The president, we did not have a president. The president came with the Republican Constitution a year later, a year after independence. So this Leviathan was created in 1962. And that is the case today. Now, how does that relate to corruption? When you have a public official who wields that kind of power, you can only imagine what they can do with it. Power, they say, power corrupts, yeah? And if power corrupts, what about absolute power? It corrupts absolutely. So we have had a system which has allowed our public officials, starting with the president, all the way down, which is made sure that these officials exercise powers without any control. And the results have been disastrous. So we have had cases in Tanzania. Mkapa stealing from the Bank of Tanzania when he was president is just one example. We have many examples of those, of theft, grand theft on a grand scale, being organized from State House, our White House. It is white. You know our presidential palace. We don't call it the White House, even though it is white. But our State House has been what our former president, our first president, actually described it once, a den of thieves and crooks. It has been a den of thieves and crooks because of this constitutional and political system in which the president is largely above the law. So for a country like Tanzania, in recent years, there has been a lot of investment from abroad. Tanzania, from around 1995 to 2015, Tanzania was the #1 foreign direct investment destination in the mining sector. We attracted more money in mining than any other African country, including South Africa, which has always been big on mining. So there's been a huge amount of money into mining. We have, beginning around 2000, we have attracted massive amounts of foreign direct investment in oil and gas exploration. Some of the biggest names in oil and gas in this country, ExxonMobil, you name them, have been operating in Tanzania. And you can never get to know how these companies operate, because the contracts that they enter with the government are some of the most closely guarded secrets in the country. But still, we have been able to, get some of these contracts and production sharing agreements in oil and gas. And the story that they tell is a story of the country sold to investors and of possibly billions of dollars spent bribing government officials. We have cases which a few years ago, one major case was actually investigated by the Serious Fraud Office of the United Kingdom, in which the former Attorney General was found to have almost $600 million in bank accounts in places like Guernsey, like the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and so on and so on. It is that way because of the way the constitutional system is organized. Now, I want to finish on a slightly brighter note. I even myself get tired of telling this doom and gloom. We have struggled and we continue to struggle to change our constitution and our politics, to create a system which allows citizens, which allows our elected representatives to control the workings of the government, which allows the people to know what elected officials are doing on their behalf. So in the past few years, we have been engaged in a great struggle to get a new constitution for the country. And some of the results of that struggle are what happened to me in 2017. These systems don't change peacefully. They don't change without resistance. And so in the past 5 years, we have seen the kind of repression in the country that is without precedence in our country. I'm lucky I survived. I survived the 16 shots. A lot of people I knew, a lot of my friends and colleagues, some of them have disappeared, disappeared and could not see them again. Others have been killed. Many have been sent to prison. As I speak, the national chairman of my party, we are the largest opposition party in the country, and my party chairman is in prison as we speak, charged with treason. Anyone knows what treason is? Huh? You know what treason is? If you want to kill your president, or you want to overthrow the government using unconstitutional means, you have committed treason. And treason offense carries death penalty. So my party chairman is facing terrorism, not treason. Sorry. He is facing terrorism charges. What did he do? He has been organizing national effort for constitutional reform to create a better constitution for the country. And for that effort, for that reason, he was arrested, shackled, driven 1,000 kilometers from Mwanza in the northwest to Dar es Salaam on the coast. And after 6 days of being held in Communicado, he was charged with terror offenses. If you're charged with terrorism offenses, however ludicrous, you cannot be bailed. And so he is in prison until such time as he wins his case or the charges against him are withdrawn. That is not a very bright note to end. The bright note is there has been a lot of food pushback. There has been a lot of fight back. We have not taken it lying down. We have not accepted this reign of terror and this corrupt system. We have fought back with organized under terrible conditions. But Tanzania today is, I think, the opposition in Tanzania today is even stronger than it was 5 years ago when the repression began. Internationally, for a long time, Tanzania did not appear on international radar screens at all. We always had a very good press. But in these 5 years, international awareness of the situation in Tanzania has grown. We have a lot of support internationally. In the past 2 years alone, I have been to Washington, D.C. to speak to members of Congress, to speak to people in the State Department. This is my 4th time. Western media, American media is much more aware of what is going on now than it was in years past. We have friends, we have supporters, pretty much in European Union, in Scandinavia. Scandinavians have always given money without asking questions. They are beginning to ask questions. And therefore, the hope is that a government, however strong, however corrupt, cannot withstand this kind of pushback from inside the country and from outside the country. That is the hope, and that is the bright spot. I think we shall win. I think we will get a better kind of country that we deserve. I'm done. If you have questions, I would love to answer. Yes.
So I have a couple of questions actually. But, I just want to say thank you for coming today. You speaking to us. It was very nice little speech, even if it was brief. And I know you would want to speak more.
I can go on and on.
So my question for you was just like out of curiosity about yourself.
Yeah.
Would be like, what languages do you speak?
You mean what languages do I speak?
Yes.
Okay, I speak 3 languages. Because I'm Tanzanian, I speak Swahili. Swahili is the national language. Everyone speaks Swahili. It's the language of the east coast of Africa. And Tanzania is a country of 120 plus ethnic groups. And I belong to one of those ethnic groups, a small tribe in the center of the country called the Wanyatu. So that is my first language, Kenyatu. And because Tanzania was a British colony, we also speak a bit of English. So English is my third language. I've been in Belgium for it's going to be 4 years in January. I have given up on Flemish, given up on Dutch. So 3 languages. Yeah. That's all.
Yeah, I was going to ask one. So,
And then.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming out today. But so my question was, you mentioned how 10 parliamentary members are elected or appointed by the president. So how big is Parliament in general? How much sway does that, like, is that 10 pretty significant in this way?
That's a valid question. The current composition of Parliament is, the total is 360 there. Take off 10. 360. Now, of those 360, 264 are constituency MPs, meaning they are directly elected by the people. And then, plus 10 who are appointed by the president, plus 5 who are appointed by the Zanzibar House of Representatives. If you look at Tanzania, the official name is the United Republic of Tanzania. It is United Republic because in 1964, Tanganyika, which is Tanzania mainland, and Zanzibar formed a union, and Tanzania was born. So Zanzibar, the islands of Zanzibar enjoy a certain amount of autonomy. They have, a government, they have a president, they have a parliament, House of Representatives. Now, that House of Representatives appoints 5 members to become members of the National Assembly of the United Republic. The rest, about 120 or so, are indirectly elected members of parliament representing women. Our constitution stipulates that at least a third of all members of parliament shall be women. Now you have women MPs, women constituency MPs who are direct elected, and then you have 1/3 who are we call them special seats MPs. They are indirectly elected. They are elected on the basis of the total parliamentary vote that a party obtains in a general election, provided you get at least 5%. So any party that obtains about 5% of the total parliamentary vote is entitled to a certain number of those special seats. So if you look at that way, the presidential appointees in parliament are not that many, they're only 10. So, they should not matter. But they do matter. Parliament is supposed to be a representative organ of the people, which is to say, every member of parliament should be elected by the people. But we have, I was just giving you the sense of the kind of powers that the president has. We have a system where the president appoints 10 members of parliament. It used to be worse in years past. When our parliament started in the colonial period, all members were appointed by the colonial government. And then the number has been steadily decreasing up to now that there are 10 appointed by the president. There should not be a single member of parliament appointed by anybody except by the people. That's what I have. You okay?
This kind of builds.
Please, I'll get back.
Are the people and citizens of Tanzania in general agreement or disagreement with how the government operates?
That's a very difficult question. They will say they have been winning elections, and therefore they will say that the Tanzanian people have accepted this kind of state of affairs. But we have a system in which the president appoints, as I said, he appoints the National Electoral Commission. He appoints the returning officers. The returning officers here, how do you call the returning officers?
Secretary of State.
The Secretary of State is the person who declares election results here, right? That is the case, right? I should think so.
Like county administrators.
Hmm?
I think the county administrators
For
too.
the state, I think it's the.
Okay.
At the state level, do you have people appointed from Washington, D.C. supervising elections here? No. Here elections are supervised locally. In Tanzania, the people who declare the winners are appointees of the president. He can hire them, he can fire them. So come elections, who do you think they will declare the winner? Yeah? So we have had a situation where those of us who have been in the opposition, I cannot begin to tell you how difficult it is to win an election in Tanzania, even when you have the support of the people. You can get all the votes and still not be declared. So it's I would say that given a free and fair election, given a level playing field, the people of Tanzania will vote this lot out. But it has not been that easy for many years because they control the electoral machinery totally, almost totally. Yeah? Yes, ma'am.
So,
And then you, sir. And then somebody, yes, in that order.
So, given that there are so stacked against the party as far as there are so many factors to consider, how do you plan on instituting a new constitution or fulfilling that goal?
It's actually very easy to give up. It is very, very easy to give up because the odds are really stacked against us. But we just cannot afford to give up because if we give up, they will just run roughshod over us. And therefore we have to keep on fighting. And democracy is never given from heaven. It is built. We have to fight, we have to sweat, we have to pay the price. You people in the United States know this very well. You know, this country has a long tradition of people fighting to create, better and more just systems here, right? How easy were the civil rights struggles of the 50s and 60s? How easy were they? Yeah. How easy was it to end slavery? It had my knowledge of the U.S. Constitution is there was a time when black people were three-fifths of a person. From being three-fifths of a human being to be a human being, you had to fight a civil war, right? And then you had a long dark night of Jim Crow, yeah? To end Jim Crow, people demonstrated and fought and fought and died and went to prison, you know? That's what we have to do. That's what we're doing. You cannot give up. And we will not give up. Yes, sir.
I have two questions that go together.
Yes.
So first, is there anything the opposition can do at this point to limit the corruption, like work with companies like ExxonMobil themselves? And second, theoretically, if your party were to come into power tomorrow, how would you view the presence of the companies like ExxonMobil in your country?
That's a very good question, and a very difficult one. How do you deal with companies that you know that are operating in the country by through bribing of public officials? Will you kick them out and shut down their operations? How easy is that? Will you close their businesses and send their employees home? Yeah. So it is difficult. I think the most that can be done is to create systems, to create laws and institutions which will make sure that these kinds of behavior is not allowed to happen again. Maybe it may be possible to prosecute those who are responsible for, because not everybody enjoys immunity under our laws. It's only the president who enjoys immunity for prosecution. It may be possible to prosecute some of the people who have been involved in these corrupt deals, but it is not an easy subject. It is not an easy thing to do. You can imagine how difficult it would be to obtain the kind of evidence necessary to charge them. So it is a difficult subject to tackle, but the answer lies in making sure that you have tighter controls, you have tighter systems which prevent things like this from happening. Let's see.
So I know I see.
And then there was another hand over there, and then I'll come.
I know I asked you at first what languages you speak. I'm sorry, everybody else had to go a little bit harder on you. So I guess it's my turn. But you did say you were a lawyer, and then you were also a parliament member until July of 2020. Is that correct?
July 2017, September 2017.
Okay, so that was,
Actually, I was shot on September 7th, 2017, but because I had to leave the country, I was my parliamentary seat was I was stripped of my parliamentary seat in June of 2019 for absenteeism. Yeah. I was. They shot me, ran me out of the country, and then they say this guy is. We hear he is in Europe somewhere. He's not in Parliament working, is it? Yeah.
so how did you get appointed to Parliament?
I was elected.
Okay.
I was elected. I first contested an election in 1997. I was a graduate student. That was our first multi-party election in our history. I was a graduate student in England. And I told myself I wasn't going to miss the opportunity to contest the first multi-party election in our history. Well, that was 1997, 1995. And then I lost, went back to school, finished my school, and then I prepared for about 15 years. I went back again in 2010, and I won. So I won the first time in 2010, re-elected.
So I had a couple of like follow-up questions, like kind of pertaining to some other stuff, questions that were like there. So I know you're talking a lot about how like the president uses his power. Do you think that the Constitution, the way that it's formed, you know, they said like the only person that has full immunity is the president. Do you think the Constitution is somewhat of a scapegoat, especially for those in power? And like, if you do think that, like, I know you were a presidential candidate as well. So like, what systems like do you propose for this like reformation to like have the country be back on its feet, like, you know, Pete Tanzania, in your opinion?
Well, that's a very good question. If the problem, the number one problem is this vast presidential power, then the remedy is necessarily create a constitutional system that whittles down the presidential powers, reduce the powers, and make sure that those powers are limit their control by institutions of accountability. It should be possible for the president to be removed by parliament, for instance, on a motion of no confidence. Our constitution allows for impeachment, but as the United States has proved time and again, it is impeachment is actually impossible to remove a sitting president. So, if impeachment does not work, and it has not worked in America, you know, since 1787, then it should be possible for the president to be removed on a simple vote of no confidence, like is the case, for instance, in South Africa. The South African president can be removed by parliament on a vote of no confidence. Prime ministers in parliamentary democracies are subject to removal by parliament on motion of no confidence. So a system that allows institutions of accountability to control the president. Parliament is one, the courts are another. It does not stand to reason that the president should be protected from being held accountable for wrongdoing. This is a vestige of the absolute monarchies of centuries past. They cannot be allowed to continue in the 21st century. So reduce the presidential powers, control the White House, if you will, and empower citizens, empower the media, remove these laws that prevent people from speaking out. You know, a wide range of democratic measures are needed in order to make sure that you don't have this kind of imperial president. Yeah? Yes, ma'am?
Hi. Kind of going off of this question, do you think that you were shot because you want the president to become accountable and you want their power to be limited? And who do you think was
That is, let me say this. In the year before the shooting, between June 2016 and July of 2017, I was arrested 8 times and charged in court 6 times. As we speak, I have 6 different criminal cases facing me in Tanzanian courts. And all those arrests and all those criminal charges are based on statements made against the president or his exercise of his powers. I have never been arrested. I was arrested the first time, I would say, on Christmas Eve 2002. I have never been arrested for anything else other than speaking out against the presidential abuse of power. Now, I'm a very clever fellow in court, so and loud too. So it has not been possible to silence me using the courts. And so what happened, 2 hours before I was shot, the president was on national television addressing the nation. He was receiving some report. And then he started talking about those he claimed were opposing his economic war. He had launched an economic war against the business community, seizing assets, locking business executives left, right, and center. And I led the opposition to that economic war in and out of Parliament. So 2 hours before I was shot, the president said on television that those who oppose his economic war do not, his exact words are, they do not deserve to survive. Those are his exact words. And 2 hours later, I was hit 60 times. And I was the opposition chief whip. I basically the number 2 in the opposition in Parliament. And I was entitled to parliamentary housing. I was living in this fancy apartment in a heavily guarded government housing compound where ministers and all the big people were living. Guarded 24/7 with CCTV cameras all over. And that day, all security was removed. So these hitmen followed me from Parliament at lunchtime all the way to my driveway, and outside the apartment they opened fire with automatic rifles. And there has never been any investigation, none, not even an interview. I have never been asked by a single police officer investigating my case, what happened to you, Mr. Lissu? None. There has never been a single arrest. The police force, the Tanzanian police force, has said officially that they do not have a suspect. And of course, I was denied my medical benefits. I was a member of Parliament, all right? So I basically was treated by people contributing $2, $3, $10. And eventually, of course, they stripped me my parliamentary seat. So it has been very clear to me and to many people that the president was behind the shooting. The second part of the question was?
I asked you who that was from.
Oh, yes. There you have it. Yes, please.
Once again, it's like such an honor that you're here, Mr. Lissu. I just wanted to ask you, I was reading earlier an article, and it was about at the end of July, one of the chairmen or one of the leaders of the opposition, Freeman, excuse me if I pronounce it.
Freeman Mowat.
Freeman Mowat.
That's my chairman.
That's your chairman?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you that. And I also wanted to ask you, I guess, especially after I know you had this, back in March, you had expressed that you had higher hopes for the new presidency moving forward, and especially after what's happened to your chairman, and especially after being shot and being arrested numerous times. Where do you personally find the drive and the perseverance to move forward, and what keeps you going back to the fight in Tanzania?
I will speak first of the my initial optimism about the new president. President Samia Suluhu Hassan was a cabinet minister at a time when I was in parliament. In fact, she reported to the parliamentary committee on which I was a ranking member. So I worked with her very, very closely. I used to give her help. As I say, I'm very noisy, very loud. I'm a Rottweiler of sorts. I never let go. So I worked with her for 5 years. She's not mad of the Magufuli stuff. Magufuli was brutal. This lady is very, very quiet, very soft-spoken. And when I was shot, President Magufuli told the people from his party, from the ruling party, members of parliament, and everybody else, that I'm watching for who will go to Nairobi to see, to check on this case. Samia Suluhu Hassan was the vice president, and she's the only person from the government and the ruling party who came to see me in hospital in Nairobi. She came for something else. She came to participate in the inaugural ceremony for President Uhuru Kenyatta, which is in November 2017. But she made time to come and visit me in hospital, for which I hear she was severely reprimanded by her boss. And she was simply, even though she was the vice president, and even though she perhaps knew a lot of the bad things that were happening, I and many people in Tanzania do not associate her with the kind of repression that was visited upon us. So when she became president, I was very hopeful. In fact, I reached out immediately. Within 2 days of her swearing in, I contacted her office. I called and I asked to speak to her. And they told me it was still very hectic. They hadn't buried Magufuli yet. So they told me the president will call you when she's cleared her interest. So I waited. Months, weeks turned into months, and I started complaining loudly that we had reached out. My chairman, Mr. Mbowe, wrote after I had called her. Mr. Mbowe wrote officially to the president that we would like a meeting to discuss the situation in the country. And we were immediately, her office responded. The president has accepted, has promised to invite you to the State House for a discussion when she has time. She let me know. Which was nice. We had never been treated like that. For 5 years, we're being hunted down like criminals. It did not happen. And so when we started complaining loudly that the president was meeting everybody else except the largest opposition party in the country, she apparently heard. And on the 20th of July, last month, I was in a meeting in Berlin, and I received a call from Dar es Salaam, from State House. Mr. Lissu, the president wants to call you. Wants to talk to you. I said, I'm in the midst of the meeting. And when I finish the meeting, I'm going straight to the airport to return to Belgium. Is it possible to talk to her tomorrow? And they said, yes, we'll call you tomorrow. That same evening, they arrested Mr. Moore. And after my chairman was arrested, later charged with terrorism, I think there was no reason for the president to call me again. So she didn't call. But the story that I heard was the Magufuli loyalists. She inherited, when she became president, she inherited the entire machinery of government and its personnel, which was made in the image of John Pombe Magufuli. And these Magufuli loyalists are basically exercising power. She never had a political base of her own. So that she's surrounded by these vultures who were terrorizing us during the Magufuli years. And I believe, and this is what I've been told, that arresting Mr. Moore and charging him with terrorism was intended to basically spoil things. If your chairman is being held, and everyone knows that these are just fabricated, this is a fabricated case, then chances of dialogue are nil. So there are spoilers. There are people, very powerful people within her government who are spoiling things. And these are the people she inherited from her predecessor. What keeps me going? I'm alive. If I give up, what will I explain to everyone about all these terrible injuries that if all that was needed to get me out of the rest is the shooting, then they win. Yeah? I'm not going to allow them to win that case. So I'm alive and the fight continues. No more questions?
Yes, time for the last question.
Yes, I was going to ask, in terms of external forces that could be used to fight corruption in Tanzania, specifically related to the government, what do you think would be most influential? Do you think that would come from some sort of economic soft power from China? Do you think that would come from the EU? Do you think that would come from FBI from like Canada or Australia? Where do you think that would come from?
It will come from lots of places, but certainly not from China. The Chinese have their way of doing business, and it is very Chinese way. Their companies do not operate the way Western companies operate. I'm not suggesting that Western companies are not corrupt. I'm not suggesting. I'm saying that it is easier. It is easier to deal with corrupt Western companies because the systems here are much more open compared to China. You cannot know what goes on in the Chinese companies. I fought some of these companies. Barrick Gold Corporation, which has been operating in Tanzania for some time, caused a lot of trouble with the communities in rural Tanzania where they have their mines. And it was easier to fight Barrick because you can go to their website and get a lot of information about their operations. You can go to the website of the Canadian Security and Exchange Commission and get a lot of information about Barrick and its activities. You can ask friends and colleagues in Canada to apply for information under the Freedom of Information Act, and you get tons of documents. And we have obtained a lot of information from those areas, from the US, from Canada, from Western Europe, because of democracy, because systems are transparent. And because systems are transparent, it is possible to fight these corrupt groups in the West than it is fighting them in China. We never really bother the Chinese. When I come to Washington, I speak to members of Congress. I go to State Department. I speak to people at the State Department, and they listen. I speak to American media. It is easier because of democracy, because you have freedoms here that you don't have elsewhere. The World Bank has, over decades, supported some of the most dubious projects in many parts of Africa and developing world generally. But it has been possible to deal with those projects because of the transparency. The World Bank has been forced to open up its books, and it is impossible to do that in China. So outside pressure is very important in America, in Europe, in the international organizations, because of the transparency that is the hallmark of this society.
Okay, well, I'm sorry we have to wrap things up, but I could be going forever, but thank you very much once again.
Mwaka wa 6 na alikuwa akiongea hapo Dalamo School of Business kama mlivyomsikia. Huyu ni Tundu Antipas Lissu. Alikaribishwa na idara inayofundisha masuala ya kiserikali, hususan ambao wamejikita zaidi katika bara la Afrika na wanaangalia masuala ya corruption pamoja na serikali za nchi za Afrika. Wengi wa wanafunzi hao mliowaona, wengi wao watakuja kuwa madiplomat, viongozi katika serikali kuu ya hapa Marekani au federal government, na wengi wao watakwenda katika bara la Afrika. Labda baadhi yao watafika hata Tanzania na kufanya kazi katika balozi hapo ya Marekani hapo Tanzania. Practical teaching, na wamepata fursa ya kuongea na Tundu Antipas Lissu ambaye alikuwa kama profesa katika darasa hilo. Huyo ni kiongozi, sifa za uongozi zinaonekana darasani. Je, upande wa pili, je, wanazo fursa hizo au wanafanya kama kiongozi huyu Tundu Lissu ambaye mwaka huu ni wa 6 toka amepigwa risasi, na amezungumza bayana kabisa. Nilikuwa naandika chini wakati huo akitoa washa hiyo au lecture hiyo kwamba hakuna mtu yoyote aliyekamatwa, hakuna uchunguzi wowote, hakuna mtuhumiwa, na alifutiwa benefits zote zinahusiana na matibabu. Wanafunzi mmewaona hao. Katika ziara yake hapo chuoni alifundisha madarasa mawili katika siku hiyo. Alikuwa mtulivu darasani, alikuwa akiulizwa maswali na kuyajibu maswali kwa kina, na alikuwa anaongea kama ni mwalimu wa madarasa hayo katika muhula huo. Mpaka akaulizwa swali, anazungumza lugha ngapi? Huyo ni kiongozi. Tundu Antipas Lissu hana cheo chochote kama wanavyoitwa wengine madaktari. Ni Tundu Antipas Lissu. Watanzania wanawahitaji viongozi kama Tundu Antipas Lissu. Nchi ya Tanzania inamhitaji Tundu Antipas Lissu. Freeman Aika Mbowe, kama mzee Mwalimu Msuya alivyozungumza katika mahojiano yake na ITV, wakajifunze upande wa pili CHADEMA. Swali: nani kama Tundu Lissu na nani kama Freeman Akambowe? Katika kipindi chetu cha leo tunakamilisha mazungumzo yetu kwa kuwaomba Watanzania ambao bado hamjasubscribe, hamjashare, hamjalike video zetu hiyo, kwa wale ambao hawakuisikiliza lecture hii, ipo nyingine nayo ya pili, tutaicheza mara tu muda utakaporuhusu, tutairusha tena lecture ya pili, kwa sababu alifundisha madarasa mawili katika siku hiyo alipokuwepo Dalamo School of Business, University of South Carolina, hapa Columbia, South Carolina. American Swahili News pamoja na Swahili Villa Online TV tulipata fursa ya kufuatilia lecture za Tundu Antipas Lissu ambazo ziko katika lugha ya kigeni ya Kiingereza, na hiyo inaonyesha tu bayana kwamba huyu ni kiongozi ambaye Tanzania inamhitaji. Nchi yetu ya Tanzania inahitaji kiongozi ambaye anaweza kwenda katika vyuo vikuu hivi vikubwa duniani na kutoa lecture. Haitwi daktari, anaitwa Tundu Antipas Lissu. Kesho anatakiwa kuongea Ngorongoro. Mruhusuni tu akatoe lecture, aongee na Watanzania na aongee na dunia kama ikiwezekana. Tunakamilisha kipindi hiki cha Good Morning Africa katika siku hii ya leo. Ilikuwa ni special edition ambayo tumemtolea tu kwa Tundu Antipas Lissu. Sio daktari, ni Tundu Antipas Lissu. Ametoa lecture hapo Dalamo School of Business. Kwa wale wa Tanzania ambao mnataka muijue, Dalamo School of Business ipo hapa Columbia, South Carolina. Na kama mnamtaka kumjua ni nani Dalamo, Dalamo ni mwanafunzi aliyesoma katika chuo hichi cha Dalamo, na sasa hivi ni mmoja kati ya mabilionea hapa Marekani ambaye anajishughulisha zaidi katika biashara za real estate au commercial real estate, na vilevile katika biashara zingine kubwa kwelikweli hapa Marekani. Anaitwa Dalamo, na hicho chuo cha biashara hapo katika University of South Carolina kinajulikana kama Dalamo. Ni nadra sana kupata lecture ya kuja kuzungumza Dalamo School of Business. Hivyo Tundu Lissu sio daktari, bali ni mtaalam. Kwa hiyo tutamalizia kipindi chetu cha leo kwa kusema tu ya kwamba msisahau kusubscribe, kushare na kulike video zetu. Peace. Wow. Asanteni sana kwa kuungana nasi moja kwa moja kutoka katika studio zetu za hapo. Huyu ni mtangazaji wenu wa siku zote, Dr. Patrick Nigula. Peace. Tutaungana tena kesho, tutaendelea, tutawaleteni lecture pili ya Tundu Antipas Lissu kesho. Asanteni sana.